Hold on a second.
Good evening, LBE community, and welcome to another Live Black Experience community dialogue. I am excited to be joined this evening by Dr. Curtis Austin, who is going to be speaking with us tonight about the history of the civil rights movement, particularly in Mississippi. Dr. Austin is an associate professor in the School of Philosophical, Historical, and Religious Studies at Arizona State University. He studies African American history with a focus on the civil rights and Black Power movements. Named a Choice Outstanding Academic Title, his first book, Up Against the Wall, examines the history of the Black Panther Party. He recently completed a second book entitled Dare to Struggle, A History of the Black Power Movement, and is currently working on Dare to Win, A History of the San Francisco Eight, which focuses on former members of the Black Panther Party who were arrested in 2007 for the 1971 homicide of a San Francisco police officer. The book examines the motivations behind their arrests and the history of the men's involvement in the Black Panther Party and its underground apparatus, the Black Liberation Army, and it illuminates the years of community organizing by those who supported their efforts to remain free. From 2017 to 2020, Dr. Austin served as Associate Professor of History and Founding Director of the Black Studies Program at the University of Oregon. Previously, he had been Director of the Center for Oral History and Cultural Heritage at the University of Southern Mississippi and Founding Director of USM's Center for Black Studies. While serving as an associate professor in the Ohio State University's Department of African and African American Studies, Dr. Austin won the Award for Outstanding Service in the Promotion of Social Responsibility and the C. Peter McGrath University Community Engagement Award. Welcome, Dr. Austin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you to your listeners and your viewers. Today, I'm going to be discussing the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, at least the birth of the Black Power movement in Mississippi. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this topic and to answer any questions people might have. And so we'll start in a place that is, I imagine, very familiar to your listeners, and that is the 1955 murder of Emmett Lewis Till, who was a 14-year-old kid um, living in Chicago, but then visited his relatives in Mississippi in the summer of 1955. And we've heard this very familiar story where he allegedly whistled or did something to a white woman by the name of Carolyn Bryant. And word got out that that happened. And two men, J.W. Milam and Carolyn Bryant's husband, Roy Bryant, then showed up at his uncle's house one night, a week or so after this happened, abducted him, tortured him mercilessly, and shot him in the head. Next slide, please. When they did that, his body was found a few days later, and young white boy was fishing, found the body, called the sheriff. People came to get the body out of the Tallahatchie River where it had been floating for days, and his uncle Mose Wright was called to identify the body, and he did by looking at a ring on Emmett Till's finger. Emmett Till's father had given him that ring. So, as your viewers can probably see, that's kind of what Till looked like in his casket. And I show this image because Emmett Till's mother, next slide, please. Um, Emmett Till's mother, Mamie Till, decided that she was going to show the world what J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant did to her son. And that image was published in newspapers throughout the United States and throughout the world, in magazines like Jet and Life, Time, just major periodicals throughout the country. And people, of course, were affected by that terrible image. But what was important about that is that this launched I should say, helped to launch the modern civil rights movement. Certainly, by 1955, there had been civil rights activity throughout the South, as recently as early as the 19 teens. I mean, civil rights activity never really stopped, and that's why we say the modern civil rights movement. We mean in the post World War II period, because Black people were acting on their own behalf in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, long before the murder of Emmett Till. But things began to coalesce after this image and after Mamie Till went around the United States telling the story about the murder of her child. And what that story included was what happened with the trial. Next slide, please. Um, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam were brought to court. Of course, Carolyn Bryant attended court. You can see an image of Carolyn and Roy and their two boys there. And, they pled not guilty to the murder charges. But next slide, please. Um, Despite that, an all white jury freed them, saying they were not guilty. Of course, everybody knew that they had been guilty. Um, Next slide, please. And, where he was killed in Lafleur County, where he was found, just people talking about it. Like it wasn't like they had tried to hide the fact that they killed Emmett Till. There was, of course, police investigation, sheriff's investigation, FBI investigation. All of these law enforcement entities knew exactly who killed Till, but they decided they weren't going to provide any justice. And so, because there was not going to be any justice, people began to coalesce and start a movement. And again, that movement was sort of focused around the horrendous image of Emmett Till in all the magazines and newspapers that they saw. And so, people decided it's time to move, to get civil rights for Black people, to have Black people treated as human beings. And so, various organizations, including the NAACP, the Congress of Racial Equality, and so many other ones that hadn't even been started yet, um, start to form. And that's when we see the start of the movement. First, throughout the South, with Mississippi as a focal point, but then throughout the United States. And so just to give you a sense of what's happening in Mississippi in the early days after the murder of Emmett Till, there was this guy by the name of Clyde Kennard. Next slide, please. Um, Clyde Kennard had been born and raised in Mississippi, and I think in his early teenage years, around the time that he was 13, his mother sent him from his hometown in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, to live with his sister, Sarah, in Chicago. Sarah had not been well, and his mom wanted Clyde to be there to help take care of her. So he went through middle school, graduated from high school, and wound up in the military after he graduated from high school. He served in World War II, where he helped liberate Jews from Nazi concentration camps. He also served in the Korean War, where he was a paratrooper and won many medals and awards for his service. Well, the United States government provided something called the GI Bill. And the GI Bill gave soldiers who fought in World War II and Korea um, an opportunity to buy houses, to get loans to buy houses, and to go to university for free. And what Kennard did after he came back from Korea was he enrolled at the University of Chicago, because he lived in Chicago at the time. He had this free voucher to go to school, and he enrolled at the University of Chicago, became a political science major, was a very good student, and 3 years into his um, undergraduate career, right before he graduated, as a matter of fact, his father, who was still back in Mississippi, fell ill. And because Kennard had recently bought his parents, his mother and father, a farm with money he made from having served in the military, he wanted to go and support his mom and make sure that the farm did not go under or that she wasn't taken advantage of. Because again, it's still the 1950s. It's 55, it's 56 at this point. So he left the University of Chicago and moved back to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where he helped his mom get the farm back up and running. That took about a year, and he decided, okay, things are fine now. I want to go ahead and finish my undergraduate career. I want to get my college degree. But he didn't want to leave his mom. He didn't want to drive the 16 hours from Hattiesburg to Chicago to go back and get an undergraduate degree, especially when there was a university, a college rather, Mississippi Southern College, right down the street from where he lived, like 5 miles away from where he lived. And plus, he had the GI Bill. He was a veteran, and he literally only had like a semester to go, a quarter to go, like not much time at all. He just wanted to finish his schooling, and he applied to the what's now the University of Southern Mississippi, and was accepted, and was sent a letter to this effect. He got that letter. He came to the Office of Admissions, and when the people in the Office of Admissions saw that he was a black person, they said, "No, we don't let black people go to school here." Um, Kennard, of course, didn't understand that, began to ask questions, and to insist on his right to go to school. I mean, it's 1957. Brown versus Board of Education has been passed in 1955, saying that there can be no segregation in state supported schools. And he wanted to stay there in Mississippi and go to school. Well, of course, the people who ran that university, the president there, William David McCain, um, had an admissions director by the name of Aubrey K. Lucas, who he instructed not to allow Kennard to attend. And there was a lot of back and forth with Kennard coming to meet with President McCain saying, "I'm never going to allow you to get into this school," with Kennard responding, "It's really not up to you. It's, the state law, and as a matter of fact, federal law says people who are American citizens can go to school anywhere they want." So because they didn't like Kennard's approach to that, they actually decided to get rid of him. And one of the things they did was to think about bombing his car, but they threw that idea away because they had been bombing people's cars for years at that point, and they thought that they would get caught. People who were involved in civil rights activity had their homes bombed, their churches bombed, their cars bombed, and pretty much everybody knew who did it. So they didn't want to do that to Kennard. But there was a state law that said that no one could go to institutions of higher learning in Mississippi if they had a felony on their record. And so they decided to frame Clyde Kennard. So after one meeting with President William David McCain, Kennard is leaving the campus of the University of Southern Mississippi. He is arrested when he's leaving for reckless driving and speeding, although he's not even in his car. He's walking. He's taken to the local jail and imprisoned. He's also beaten in the local jail. But while he is being photographed and fingerprinted, the deputy who drove his car from the campus of the University of Southern Mississippi um, came inside the police station with his arms full of liquor bottles, saying, "Look what I found." And what he's Mississippi is a dry state at the time, and they're saying, this guy had all this liquor in his car. Well, the problem with that is everybody in town, it's a small town, right? Everybody in town knew Kennard did not drink. And so he probably would not have been driving around with 6 bottles of illegal liquor, especially going to campus to meet the president of the University of Southern Mississippi. Despite that, Kennard was tried very quickly, of course, by a white judge and an all white jury. And in 10 minutes, an all white jury sentenced Kennard to 7 years of hard labor at the Parchman Penitentiary. So while he's in Parchman, they decided to punish him further, and they poisoned him. Kennard is just poisoned, and he's sent to the University Medical Center. And they say, well, it looks like he might have cancer. Next slide, please. Uh, Even though That's not actually quite clear. Maybe he had cancer, maybe he had been poisoned. At any rate, the point is that he's on his way to not living very long. He's sent back to prison, despite the fact that the doctors petitioned the prison warden and the governor to let him go because they say he has a 20% chance of living, actually less than 20% chance of living for the next 5 years under those conditions. But they decided they would not let him go. And then there was a nationwide outcry against his imprisonment. Some doctors sneaked into the prison and found out that it probably wasn't cancer. It was maybe he was poisoned. And eventually, the governor, Ross Barnett, releases Kennard. Kennard leaves Mississippi, goes back to Mississippi, has several surgeries to deal with his ailment. Next slide, please. And is trying to recover, but it's too little and too late. And not long after he's released, next slide, please. On the 4th of July of 1963, Kennard is dead, and his body is flown back to Mississippi where he's buried. So that's the kind of activity that's taking place in Mississippi, where people are pushing against the economic system. They're pushing against the educational system. They're basically just trying to change things so that Black people are free. Because despite what the state constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the U.S. Constitution says, Black people are not being treated as either humans or citizens. And so they decided to take up their own action and secure their freedom. And people have heard about the sit in movement, the school desegregation movement. I won't get too much into that, but one of the organizations that becomes key in the civil rights activity in Mississippi is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That's an organization that's actually started right around the time Kennard is trying to desegregate the University of Southern Mississippi, and right around 1960. Next slide, please. And what we see is because of the sit-in activity that took place in the late 50s, starting in Greensboro, North Carolina, going throughout places like Nashville, Tennessee, Atlanta, Georgia, even all the way down to Jackson, Mississippi, and all the way up to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Madison, Wisconsin, throughout New York City, Connecticut. The sit-in movement was really widespread. And what the students who were organizing the sit-in movement decided to do was to find their own organization. And the woman who helped them do that was a woman by the name of Ella Baker. Ella Baker had been an activist since the 1930s. She was based in New York City. She was the architect of the bus boycott movement in Montgomery. Most people think it's Martin Luther King Jr. It's not. It's people like Ella Baker working behind the scenes, making sure things get done. And Ella Baker caused these students to Shaw University in North Carolina and tells them that, the ministers of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which is headed by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., people in the NAACP, which is headed by Roy Wilkins, are wanting them to become part of their organization. And she tells them in no uncertain terms, do not join with these people. They're not going to be good for you. If you want to have an organization, you need to do it yourself. You need to have your own organization. And right there in Shaw, at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, they start the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee with Ella Baker as their advisor. And Ella Baker gives this speech there where she titles it, "It's about more than a hamburger." It's about more than just sitting in, eating at a lunch counter. It's about human rights, having our political, economic, social, and human rights. And these students are then set free to do whatever it is they want to do. It's not like Ella Baker gave them marching orders, as she just inspired them and encouraged them to think their own thoughts and behave in the way they thought was best if it were going to secure freedom and equality for Black people. And that's what they decided to do. Next slide, please. They created the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And you had Black and white students, students from the North and the South. Next slide, please. who all joined together and said, we are going to lay our lives on the line, not just to open up schools and desegregated lunch counters, but to make sure that Black people are treated fairly. And every walk of life, whether it's in employment, housing, education, economics, gender rights. I mean, you name it. They had a wide ranging set of goals that they wanted to accomplish. And they were doing a very good job in doing this. And in fact, the president tried to co opt them. Next slide, please. Here on the screen, you see different people who are members of SNCC. In the middle there is Bob Zellner. Bob Zellner actually is the son of a Ku Klux Klansman. He's from a very small town called Murder Creek in Alabama, in Lower Alabama. Meets Martin Luther King and gets turned out and becomes a member of SNCC. That's Julian Bond, the late great Julian Bond, in the upper right hand corner of the screen, and Casey Hayden in the upper left hand. That's Joyce Ladner in the lower right hand, and the quite famous Bob Moses in the lower left hand part of the screen. And these people are in their teens and 20s, and they drop out of college. Bob Moses is at Harvard getting a master's degree in math, and he drops out of college to join this movement. Julian Bond is at Morehouse when he joins this movement. Joyce Ladner is at Jackson State University when she joins this movement. So these college students from all over the country decide, hey, there's something a little bit more than a college degree at this point. I'm going to take some time off and go get us some freedom. And that's what they set out to do. And next slide, please. They were so successful that after President John F. Kennedy, I should say candidate John F. Kennedy, saw their power, he decided to try and co-opt them. And so he noticed that Black people in cities like Cleveland and Chicago, Detroit, New York, other urban enclaves, San Francisco, Los Angeles, places where Black people can vote. Not so much in Alabama, Tennessee, and Mississippi, right? Although some Black people could vote in some of those states, but not very many. He knew that these were, people who could get him elected. In fact, while he was running his campaign, John F. Kennedy noticed that Dr. Martin Luther King had gone to jail, and he and his brother, RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, called the sheriff of the jail and said, hey, if you let him out and we win this presidential election, we'll make sure you're taken care of. And that's what the sheriff did. The sheriff let King out of jail. And of course, with the news, the Kennedy administration spread the news that they were supporting civil rights by supporting Martin Luther King, and people in those northern locales, as I just described, in the Detroits and Chicagos and New York cities of the United States, decided to vote for Kennedy. And that's what gave him the margin he needed to win. And, he became thought of as this civil rights president. Now, I'll talk a little bit about that later, but these students decided to test the Kennedy administration by organizing something known as the Freedom Rides. Next slide, please. And the Freedom Rides was this, group of people, mostly SNCC and core students and other folks who weren't in these organizations, but primarily these organizations that had sprung up being people by people in SNCC and core. And so they were going to ride from Washington, D.C. all the way to New Orleans to test this law that said there can be no segregation on interstate buses. The Interstate Commerce Commission had decided that was illegal. The Supreme Court had decided it was illegal, and they were going to test to see what happened. And they made it through the Upper South, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina without too much of a problem. But then they were beaten and had their bus bombed in Alabama. In places like Anderson, they were beaten nearly to death. In places like Montgomery, Alabama, they were beaten nearly to death. And when they left Alabama, they headed to Mississippi. And what you see there on the screen is that bus with some new students, because a lot of people decided they weren't going to continue on. Some continued, but most of them who had been beaten, they were, number one, they were in the hospital. And number two, they were traumatized by what had happened to them. So the Kennedy administration agreed that there was too much violence. And so when they get to Jackson, the Jackson police were simply going to arrest them if they attempted to test this law. And that's exactly what they did. They come into the bus station in Jackson, Mississippi. The white people tried to use the black restroom. The black people tried to use a white restroom. That at the time was a violation of the local segregation ordinance, and they were sent to jail. But this time, it wasn't just like a regular jail. Next slide, please. They were sent to Parchman Penitentiary, where Clyde Kennard was at the time. He was there dying, being worked to death in the fields, picking cotton and being poisoned when these people showed up from Jackson and Parchman Penitentiary. You can see there on the screen, it's women involved, just like there were men. Next slide, please. But there are also men. They're just young people from all over the country who are engaging in these freedom rides. And when they violate the segregation statutes, next slide, please, they are sent to prison. And they are saying they're going to stay in prison until something is changed. Eventually, they change policies and rules in prison. They don't cower. They continue singing their songs, praying their prayers, and fighting their fight. And they get out and they spread throughout Mississippi and throughout the South. And those that leave and go back north, they help to start movements in their home communities and on their campuses. So next slide, please. So it is a major undertaking when these young people are sent to prison in Mississippi. These freedom riders then come out and say, we're not just here to ride a bus. We're going to help people secure their freedom. And they link up with local leaders all over the state and continue their activity. And one of the local leaders they link up with is a guy by the name of Medgar Evers. Next slide, please. Medgar Evers had been born and raised in Mississippi. He had gone to college at Alcorn State University, and also, like Clyde Kennard, had served in the military in World War II. And because he was abroad, fighting and risking his life for freedom and for democracy, when he returned home, he thought it wasn't too much to ask for his own freedom and his own democracy. And he and his brother, Charles Evers, went to their local courthouse in Kemper County, which is in eastern Mississippi near the Alabama border, and asked to register and vote. And they were told they were not going to be registered to vote, but they actually insisted on it. They went back home, they got their guns, and when they came back, the registrar let them register to vote. So they became the first black registered voters in Kemper County since the Reconstruction era. And eventually, Medgar Evers works his way up in the NAACP to become the state field secretary. And he's all over the state solving racial problems, whether it's got to do with voting issues of violence, labor issues. So he's a marked man. People don't like his activity, but there in his hometown of Jackson, Mississippi, he's organized this boycott. Next slide, please. And this boycott is saying to the people who run the stores downtown, hey, we want to be able to try our own clothes that we buy. At the time, black people couldn't try our own clothes or shoes. Like if you didn't get the right size, that was just too bad. And you couldn't return it because, they say, hey, you're black. We don't take return items from black people. And they say, we also want to be able to work here. We spend a lot of money in this store, but those stores downtown Jackson were not hiring any black people. So they wanted to be treated with dignity and courtesy, like human beings, but they also wanted their fair share of the jobs because, again, they were keeping that store, I should say those stores, afloat. And of course, the white merchants were saying, hey, we're not ready to do that. And the black people boycotted, and the white merchants started to feel the pinch. And so as a result of them feeling the pinch and losing a lot of money, people in these racist organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, racist members of the Mississippi State Legislature senators and people in the House of Representatives began to organize in groups like the White Citizens Council and the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission to fight against what Medgar Evers was doing. The Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission, for example, was a state-funded organization that spied on people involved in the civil rights movement and did everything it could to derail the civil rights movement. So, a complete violation of state and federal law, but they're using taxpayer funds to do this. So, they're using Black people's money to oppress Black people. And they don't like the work that Medgar Evers is doing. And so, one night, after Medgar gives his speech to people participating in the boycott, it's actually the same night that John F. Kennedy gives his famous civil rights speech on TV, saying, all citizens, Black and white, North and South, men and women, deserve to be treated as full human beings. And hey, I'm going to pass some laws to make sure people are treated that way. He gives that speech. That's in June of 1963, June, I think mid-June, 16th or 17th. Don't quote me on the dates. It's in mid-June of 1963. Well, that night, Evers goes home, after that speech about the boycott, and a white racist shoots him in the back and murders him, assassinates him. Because of the work that he's been doing throughout the state. And by the way, he also found witnesses for the Emmett Till trial that neither the DA, the local DA, they're prosecuting that case, or the FBI insisted on having those witnesses heard. So state and federal agencies were against Black people securing their freedom, securing any kind of equality. So I don't want your listeners to think that, hey, the federal government was pro-Black or pro-civil rights. It actually was not. Like, when they passed civil rights laws, they passed them because Black people pressured them to pass these laws, not because they thought it was the right thing to do. In any case, that's the end of Medgar Evers. And quite frankly, that is really the end of people feeling like this nonviolent stuff is actually effective. Medgar Evers actually named his son Kenyatta after Jomo Kenyatta, because Jomo Kenyatta is a leader in Kenya, and he ran white people out of Kenya in no uncertain terms. When he gave them an opportunity to leave and they didn't, there was quite a bit of violence in Kenya, and white people had to leave or be killed, and many of them were killed. They had something called the Kikuyu peoples there, who ran something white people called the Mau Mau organization, and the Mau Mau ran white people out of that part of Africa. And Medgar Evers liked that so much that he named his son after Jomo Kenyatta. And there were lots of Black people who felt that way about what was going on in Kenya and in other parts of Africa, for that matter. And in South Africa, there was a struggle going on. In Algeria and North Africa, there was a struggle going on. In West Africa and Ghana, with Ghana getting its independence in 1957. There's a struggle all over in Central Africa, in the Congo. So Black people in Mississippi was looking, at the news, in the newspapers, and seeing what was happening in other parts of the world and learning from those things. And they were doing the same things in Jackson, Mississippi, and Hattiesburg, Mississippi, that they were doing in Soweto and Johannesburg and Nairobi and Accra, Ghana. So this wasn't just a local or state movement, a Southern movement, or a United States movement. This was a global movement to secure freedom, democracy, and equality for Black people, because Black people all over the world, whether they were in New Zealand or Bora Bora, whether they were in Trinidad, Jamaica, Cuba, Martinique, Barbados, or Egypt, they were being treated exactly the same. And of course, they were being treated that way, not just in Virginia, North Carolina, Mississippi, and Texas, but in New York, California, Washington, and Iowa. Like, there was nowhere on planet Earth where Black people were not being mistreated and deprived of their social, political, and economic rights. So despite the fact that we are focusing here on Mississippi, the exact same thing unfolding in Mississippi is unfolding in every other state of the Union, and it's unfolding in every other country on this planet where Black people can be found, including Russia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, and any other place you can name. If they're Black people during this particular period in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, they are pushing for their freedom and their equality. And what's going on in Mississippi is just a part of that. And it's not just people like Clive Kennard or Bob Moses or Julian, um, any other males I mentioned. It's women involved too. Next slide, please. One of the more famous people is a woman by the name of Fannie Lou Hamer. She is living in the Mississippi Delta when the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee comes to Mississippi to try to organize people to vote. She joins the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, becomes a leader in SNCC. Of course, for her trouble, she's kicked off the plantation where she lives. She, her husband, and all of her children. She is brutally beaten in 1963 for attending a workshop, and of course, for just being a really badass woman. I mean, she is standing up to the white racist power structure. So she's on her way back from a voter registration workshop, and the bus she's on stops in Winona, Mississippi. They know, I mean, the FBI is telling local sheriffs and police everything about their movement. So they know she's on this bus. And, you know, sheriff's deputies, the sheriff, these are white people, but they also get Black people, Black inmates to come to the bus station, take her off the bus. They take her back to this jail and they beat her mercilessly. I mean, she loses sight in one eye. She can't walk. She's unconscious, to try to prevent her from doing this work. But she recovers and she continues to doing the work. She's one of the architects of Freedom Summer. Freedom Summer takes place in 1964, the year after she's beaten. And she decides, hey, we want the vote. We want to be a part of the body politic. And of course, they didn't, you know, see themselves as part of the Republican Party. And so because the Democratic Party was the only other option, that's what they went for. People, your listeners might recall that John F. Kennedy is killed in late 1963, November, I believe it is, of 1963. His vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, former senator from Texas, ran his own cotton plantation, by the way, takes over the presidency, and he comes in, and that's his job. But in order to win, he needs the Black vote. And he solicits the Black vote in 1964. And actually, he helps the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Congress of Racial Equality, and other organizations form these voting rights organizations through their voter education project. So Johnson gets all of his rich white friends from the Ford Foundation, the DeConnick Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, to organize a voting rights campaign so that these new Black voters will turn out for him. And of course, that's what they do. Black people overwhelmingly vote Democrat in 1964. And that's how Johnson wins and keeps that office that he took over from President Kennedy after his assassination. So these people in SNCC think that, okay, they actually are on our side, but not so fast. What winds up happening is during Freedom Summer, something called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party is organized so that they can join. And Johnson says, you know, if you go register enough voters, we'll let you, you know, join the Democratic Party. That's what they do all summer. And for their trouble, they get thrown in jail, they get beaten. Some of them even get killed. You may have heard of Andrew Goodman, Michael Swerner, and James Chaney. They're organizing people to vote, again, in East Mississippi, in a small town called Philadelphia, when they are arrested one night and taken to jail. And later they're taken out of the jail by the sheriff and the police and members of the Mississippi State Highway Patrol, who all are part of the Ku Klux Klan. and they kill these people and bury them in an earthen dam. Pardon me. Um, on the property of this rich white man named Olin Burge. And so you have, state actors from the Highway Patrol, from the Mississippi Highway Patrol, the local sheriff's department there in that county, and the local police in that county. Some of whom are in the Klan, some of whom are not, but they all participate in these three murders, and they bury these people. And again, everybody knows that they've done it because they're in the coffee shop the next morning bragging about it. It's a small town. Philadelphia is a small town. Neshoba County is a small county. And by lunch, everybody knows who's killed these people, right? So that's what's going on in Mississippi. People are trying to get their right to vote. People are trying to get their right to go to school. It's 10 years after the Brown decision has been passed. That was 1954. It's 1964. Still no schools are integrated. So Black people can't learn any kind of thing about themselves. They can't learn Black history. They can't learn African history. They can't learn math or science for that matter, because the schools they do have access to just aren't that good. Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit. They do get some science and math. But I mean, the overwhelming majority of Black people in the state of Mississippi are not getting an education. They're all working as either domestics or on cotton plantations. So it's the rare student that's learning any kind of science or math, and nobody is learning African history or African American history. But that's what is going on during Freedom Summer, that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee invites all of these people from all across the country, and almost 1,000 people show up. They come from Harvard and Stanford and Yale and the University of Michigan, the University of Madison, the University of Wisconsin at Madison, from Jackson State and Alcorn State, from the University of Georgia and Clark Atlanta. All over the country, you get these young people. Some of them are in college, some of them are not, who descend on the state of Mississippi. They open up these freedom schools. They teach people how to read, how to write, how to do math. They teach them their African history. They teach them their African American history, and they're registering them to vote. And like I said, they're being killed for it. I talked about Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, but lots of people are being killed, and lots of people, there are like 1,000 people, 800 people went to jail, right? So it's a rough, hot summer. But at the end of the summer, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party goes to Atlantic City, New Jersey, and says, hey, we did all this work and we want you to deliver on your promise. Well, Fannie Lou Hamer, you see there on the screen, is giving this speech in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And the president, who instructed SNCC to go out and register these people to vote, interrupt her speech and gives his own speech because he doesn't want the rest of the country to hear it. Meanwhile, he's infiltrated the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party delegation, and rather than delivering on the speech and allowing them to be a part of the Democratic Party, he's like, no, y'all can't do that. We'll give you 2 seats at large, but you can't vote. And there were dozens of people who came to Atlantic City, and people like Fannie Lou Hamer said, we ain't come all this way for no 2 seats. We all tired. We want our freedom. And when they balked on it, they didn't give them that. This is what turned them around. And so you have people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who's influencing and inspiring other people, men and women, young and old, to join this movement. And I wanted to tell that story because it's not just men. There are people, next slide, please, like May Bertha Carter, who feels like it's her duty to fight for civil rights. And May Bertha Carter lives in the Mississippi Delta in a small town called Drew, Mississippi. And she's got several children, like 11 children or something. And because Brown versus Board of Education is now 10 years old, it's 64 or 65. She's like, it's time for some change. So she sends all her kids to the white schools. And of course, the white people don't like that. And the person whose plantation she's shitting on sends somebody to her house and says, hey, the plantation owner wants me to tell you, you need to stop that. You need to take your kids out of this white school. We don't know what you think you're doing. And May Bertha Carter, told him, hey, you go tell Mr. Thornton, that was his name. You go tell Mr. Thornton, these are my children. And I send them where I want to send them. And it's the law. So, I don't tell Mr. Thornton where to send his kids, and Mr. Thornton can't tell me where to send my kids. That's the message May Bertha Carter sent back. Of course, the next night after that, Mr. Thornton sent some people by May Bertha's Carter's house to shoot up in her house. They shot all up in that house, a little shack on the plantation in the middle of a cotton field, to threaten and scare her. And it didn't scare her. She kept doing exactly what she was doing. And somebody actually asked her during this time, Miss Carter, you're not scared these folks gonna kill you. They're killing people left and right, beating folks, running them out of the state, firing them from their job. You ain't scared. And Miss Carter was like, no, I ain't scared. Like if you scared, to die, because there's you ain't scared they're gonna kill you. She's like, if you scared to die, you already dead. If you're gonna let somebody tell you what to do, intimidate you, you might as well already be dead. And sure enough, May Bertha Carter's children went through the school system. Yes, they were mistreated. Yes, bad things happened to them, but they graduated. They all went to college, and they have lived happily ever after. And she's a hero in Mississippi for standing up, doing that kind of thing. So just wanted to make it clear that it's not just men doing this kind of work. Although men are important, I'm not saying men aren't important. They are. I haven't to this point mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. very much. He's extremely important. Next slide, please. Not only is he the spokesperson during the Montgomery bus boycott, he eventually is begun to come known as a spokesperson for the whole movement. But his wife, I'm sorry, I need to take a sip here. Coretta Scott King. She's also a civil rights activist. She's organizing people. She's giving speeches. She's doing work, and everybody deserves the credit for the sacrifices they made. Not just the men who are eloquent and charismatic and good looking. You know what I mean? The handsome people, the beautiful people. Is women doing the same kind of work, making the same kind of sacrifices. They're going to jail. They're getting shot at. They're getting beat. They're getting fired from their jobs, just like these men are. So that's kind of what's happening. And it's about this time, 64, 65, where people in the South are starting to hook up with people in the North. Martin Luther King is now seeing the wisdom of joining with Malcolm X. And Malcolm X, next slide, please, is seeing the wisdom of joining with Martin Luther King Jr. In fact, Malcolm X is all of your viewers have probably heard of the Selma to Montgomery March. Well, Malcolm X is in Montgomery talking to these marchers before they go off in March. He is trying to hook up with King. And we know from reading his diary that a week after he was assassinated in February of 1965, he had plans to be back in Alabama to link up with King and the movement. Although by this time King is in Atlanta, he was going to go down to Alabama. And so men and women are prosecuting this fight. It's not one-sided. It's not so gendered like your average textbook or documentary will tell you. Like, there are all kinds of people involved. And it's not just college students. It's people in the first grade in this movement, in the second grade, in middle school, in high school, in community college, unemployed. They ain't got no job. They're all a part of this movement. It's rich people, Black people who are rich, wealthy landowners, white people who are rich, really super wealthy people, middle-class people. This movement is made up of folks all over this country from all walks of life. And it can't just be boiled down to Martin Luther King and, Fannie Lou Hamer and just a few other people. Everybody who wants to be free is involved. And that is a story that folks who are opposed to this critical race theory teaching, that's what they're against. They don't want people to know the true history of this movement, and they don't want people to know what they were up against. That, this federal government, these state governments are dead set against Black freedom. It's not just the, poor white trash, your local redneck or somebody in a Klan outfit. That's not our problem. The real problem are the people in power, right? Whether it's political economic or social power brokers. Those are the folks who don't want to see change. The folks who are in the Supreme Court, who run corporate America, who the real influences, I will say. It's those people. And because Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were looking to get together, Malcolm X is killed, right? In February of 1965. Because look what he's doing. You got the Civil Rights Act of 1964 on paper. You've got the Voting Rights Act of 1965 on paper, but nothing is really happening. We see these numbers change. Next slide, please. But we don't see any real change. For example, when Black people in the South push back against these wrongs and get their voting rights, again, it's not because the federal government thought, hey, this is a good idea. They were pressured to grant Black people these rights, which they had in the 1860s, by the way, right? There's something called the 15th Amendment that gives people the right to vote. This was passed 100 years before 1965. We really should not have needed a Civil Rights Act of 1965. It was already in the United States Constitution. But like I said before, the federal government had no interest in enforcing that law because the federal government is anti-Black, right? Let's make that really, really clear. We don't want to sugarcoat things for your viewers. There's too much confusion as it is, right? These are the people who are the leaders of anti-Blackness. And all you got to do is look at the history of this country. They stole a bunch of Black folks from Africa, put them in some ships, brought them over here, worked them to death. When they didn't want to work them to death, they beat them to death. And that was what they needed and wanted Black people for. And not that much has changed, right? So just trying to be clear here, it ain't your poor white trash that's keeping your rights away from you. As a matter of fact, if you go talk to some poor white trash, you might make some friends. But I digress. The point here is that Black people are making inroads into securing their freedoms. And they see, okay, now we got the vote. We're still going to take it one step at a time. We're going to form our own, since the Democratic Party don't want us, we're going to form our own party. And we see an example of this. Next slide, please. In Lowndes County, Alabama. The people in Lowndes County, Alabama, formed their own organization. It's called the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. They registered themselves. People sign up to vote for them. And in Alabama, it's a law that says your political organization has to have a mascot. Most people, 90% or more of the Alabama population, Black and white, right, male and female, could not read. So they needed these symbols on the ballot. And the white symbol was a rooster, a white rooster. And so the people in Lowndes County Freedom Organization decided that they would have a panther. Panthers were really prevalent in the South during this time, in the woods from North Carolina to Texas, that you could throw a rock and hit a panther, right? You can't so much now because of the development, but at the time, these were animals that, didn't mess with people if people didn't mess with them. They just hunted and they're very solitary. And so they used this animal because they were saying, hey, we won't mess with you if you don't mess with us. But you can see the image there. If you mess with us, we ain't going to be nonviolent, and that's how they said it. I know that it's not necessarily the proper English. But these are Black people in Alabama. They're not concerned about proper English. And they start this party and they get voted into power, right? They're 80% of Lowndes County, right? How could they not be in power? And they kick white folks out of power. And they do this by defending themselves. Next slide, please. And again, it's not just men defending themselves, it's women too. You see this woman, she's there in Lowndes County, and she's part of her job is security. Like, they came by and they shot up the Lowndes County headquarters. And so what they did was to say, hey, listen, we're not actually going to take that. We're going to shoot back. If you come by here shooting again, we're going to shoot at you. And that's exactly what they did. And guess what? They didn't come by there no more after that. So this is what we see going on in the South. Of course, Alabama is right next door to Mississippi. Same thing is going on in Mississippi. So by 1966, we see things beginning to change. Now, next slide, please. And part of that change is the movement is moving further and further away from nonviolence, but it's still centered on getting economic rights, getting voting rights. And there was another election coming up, and a man by the name of James Meredith wanted to encourage Black people to vote. Now, James Meredith had desegregated Ole Miss, the University of Mississippi, which is in Oxford, Mississippi, in 1962, so 4 years earlier. And of course, Kennedy had to send in the troops, the Army, the National Guard. That whole campus was on fire. Several United States Marshals got shot. Cars were burned, buildings were burned. One reporter, I think from France, was even killed. So it was a bad time, but Meredith desegregated Ole Miss. He went to school, graduated, and here he is 4 years later back in the mix. And he's saying, listen, you don't have to be scared of these people. Um, we we have a right to vote. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to march from Memphis all the way to Jackson and show you you don't have to be scared. And so he took up something called a Meredith March Against Fear. This is in the summer of 1966. Well, although he wasn't afraid, there were people who didn't want him to do this and to publicize what was going on in Mississippi in terms of the growing movement. And so this guy by the name of James Norval met Meredith on the second day of the march, and he shot him. Next slide, please. Um, so Meredith is shot. He's flown back to a hospital in Memphis. He's taken care of. But because they didn't want the march to end, these people got together and said, hey, we're going to take up this march. And some of these people were Martin Luther King Jr. and Stokely Carmichael, who was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who was also very instrumental in helping to organize the Lowndes County Freedom Organization that I just mentioned to you. But before he went to Lowndes County, he had been in Mississippi for several years, working in the Mississippi Delta, organizing people to vote, desegregating lunch counters, trying to help desegregate schools, trying to get people jobs there in the Mississippi Delta. So he was a very seasoned activist. In any case, he and Martin Luther King Jr. Took up this march, and they said, here we go. But again, by this time, the march is violence and nonviolence is really not a part of the question. In fact, because James Meredith has been shot, they agree to hire a group of people called the Deacons for Defense and Justice to protect them, because they knew the Mississippi Highway Patrol and all the local sheriff's departments through the counties they had planned to march through were not. They knew the police were not. And so the Deacons for Defense and Justice, based in Jonesboro and Bogalusa, Louisiana, came to protect these people. And they were just that. They were these Black men, many who had been to World War II, who were really good with firearms and who were deacons in their churches. They came out to protect the marchers. But it's not like, the marchers were surprised, especially the ones from Mississippi. Next slide, please. Because by this point, what we see happening is Black people have put down this farce of nonviolence. Like it was a tactic, it was a strategy. Sometimes it worked, but just as Margaret Block, who is a member of SNCC, as is her brother Sam Block in Greenwood, Mississippi, a member of SNCC, she told me during one interview that nonviolence is fine in the daytime, but when the cameras from CBS and ABC go home, when the newspapers, the white newspaper reporters and photographers go home at night, it just don't work. It don't work like that. So we have to protect ourselves, and that's what they were doing. And you see on your screen books about self-defense in Mississippi. And so you're not going to read a lot about this in the New York Times or the Washington Post or other mainstream. Um, uh, could you go back, please? Go. Yes, thank you. Not there, no, but back to the books. Yes, thank you. Um, they were saying we're going to defend ourselves. We don't care what the newspaper or the TV says. Like, if we want to keep living, we're going to defend ourselves because they've killed all these people. They've beaten all these people. There's nothing wrong with defending ourselves. And so that's what is happening on this march. Next slide, please. Um, on this march, we see a new person come to the fore. And this guy, his name is Willie Ricks. You see Willie Ricks there in the image with Stokely Carmichael, who eventually changes his name to Kwame Ture. But and Martin Luther King is also in that image. They're marching during this Meredith March. And what Willie Ricks is doing is he's going out in front of the marches, telling all these people, we're not going to be saying freedom now anymore, because we've been saying freedom now since 1960, for 6 years, and we still ain't got no freedom. We're going to start saying black power. We want black power. And these communities that he talked to, they responded, and that's what happened. Next slide, please. They were primed. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello. They were primed to go, and Willie Ricks is the person who spreads this news about black power. And so the march comes up on Greenwood, Mississippi. Next slide, please. And what they've been doing, every night is they sleep on some black farmer's land. I remember I said there were wealthy black people in Mississippi, or they sleep on the school grounds of these segregated black schools. And that's what they had planned to do in Greenwood that night. But when they got to Greenwood, the local sheriff would not let them pitch the tent on the grounds of the black school in Greenwood, even though the local black superintendent, had given them permission before. When Stokely Carmichael tried to pitch the tent, they sent him to jail. So Carmichael is in jail. He's in jail all day. Eventually, they get him out of jail. And that night, next slide, please. That night, he gets out of jail. He's at this rally at a park because they couldn't sleep on the school grounds. They sleep in the Broad Street Park there. And he gives this speech, and it becomes known as the Black Power speech. And as I've said, he doesn't waste any words. He's saying, he's tired of going to jail. He's been to jail 27 times at this point. He ain't going to jail no more. And white people need to stop treating us like this. And what we're going to start saying now is black power. And that's going to be the end of it. Like we did in Lowndes County, Alabama, we're going to create our own political party, and we're going to have our own economic system. We want black power. And he asked that crowd of hundreds of people, what do you want? And the crowd responded, we want black power. And it was kind of like having church at that point. Carmichael would say, what do you want? The crowd would respond, black power. And of course, you have local reporters there, white reporters, local TV people there, and they are scared. It's a very electric moment, right? And so they're in the minority, and they hear Stokely Carmichael giving this fiery speech, and they see all these black men and women and children in this crowd responding to him, yeah, we want black power. And so the next morning, what we see in the newspapers and on the news is, black people want to kill white people. Well, he didn't say nothing like that. And that's not what black power means. It had nothing to do with that, but that's what they printed in the New York Times. That's what they showed on ABC and NBC and CBS. And that's what you heard on the radio. And so black power had a black eye long before, it really even got started. Next slide, please. But what this did was to shift the movement out of the South. I mean, there was people still working in the South, but into the West, into the Midwest, into the Northeast. So we see things start happening in California, Black Panther Party. It started just a few months later in New York, in Oakland, in LA. We see all this kind of stuff. We see this shift from a movement that's focusing on voting and integration to one that's focused on economic equality, educational equality, political equality, and just black freedom in general, like equality in general. And they want this equality, they want this freedom by any means necessary. Like if it takes nonviolence to get it, they're willing to engage in nonviolent activity. If it takes defending themselves to get it, they are willing to engage in armed self-defense. And so that's what the Black Power movement became about. And you see this next slide, please. This huge upsurge in Black pride. You see the afros come out. You see people start wearing colorful African clothes like dashikis. You see people speaking African languages like Swahili. All these new political and cultural institutions being invented, Black theater, Black poetry, spoken word, Black music. I mean, think of all that wonderful Black music coming out of the 1960s and 1970s. This Black Power music from the Temptations, Black Power music from Sly and the Family Stone, Black Power movement from music from people like Stevie Wonder and so many folks I can name. The idea was to place a premium on Black people, to be proud of being Black, and to unify and to support Black people and to be self-determined. And as I said, to get your liberation by any means necessary. And so that's kind of what Mississippi contributed to the larger national and international movement. This notion that we are going to fight for our freedom and we're going to do it regardless of what happens to us. If we go to jail, fine. If we get beat, fine. If we lose our job, fine. If we get run out of the state, fine. If we get killed, fine. But we're going to get our freedom. Like that was their point. And people in other states, people in other countries glommed on to this example. And they thought, yeah, right on. If they can do it in Mississippi, we could do it everywhere else. Next slide, please. And that's what you begin to see all over the country and all over the world. You see the Black Power movement catch on fire throughout the Caribbean, even in Africa. It's in Europe. It's in Australia and New Zealand. It's everywhere, as I mentioned earlier. There are Black people. You see a Black Power movement, and it goes from the 60s and 70s, as I've explained, all the way up to the 80s, 90s, and in fact, into the 21st century. It's still going on. It's just not in the news. It's going on alongside the movement for Black Lives, the Black Lives Matter movement. It's the same thing. And so having said that, I'll say thank you to your audience for your patience and for your listening. I will end there. If you have questions or comments from me, I am happy to take them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. That was an amazing presentation, and we are grateful for it. The first question for tonight, in preparing for this conversation, I saw a quote from Michael Morris. He's the Director of Public Engagement at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. And he said that the movement that took place in Mississippi didn't just change Mississippi, it didn't just change the nation, it changed the world. And so, and you focus so much on that throughout your presentation. So I think the core question of this conversation really is, and what we really hope people understand is, what makes Mississippi so important to the civil rights movement? How did it really make the civil rights movement possible or successful?
Thank you for that question. I think at least part of the answer, right? We probably don't have the couple of hours it would take for me to give you a full answer to that. So I think part of the answer is that the average human being is for the underdog, whether you're Black or white, rich or poor. The average human being supports the underdog. Most people, when they hear the story of David and Goliath, they're happy David won, right? Most people are like that. It's some people want Goliath to win, but not too many. You probably don't know it. So people saw Mississippi as kind of the worst of the worst, and the Black people in Mississippi as being the poorest of the poor and the most oppressed of the oppressed. And when these people rose up and showed their strength and demonstrated their willingness to be free, regardless of the consequences, I think folks appreciated that example. And they were shocked and surprised by it. And I think they felt like, well, if they can do it, then surely, me ensconced here in my nice home in New York City or Chicago, Illinois, surely I can do something. I could send them $1. I can go down and register somebody to vote. And folks who read about this in newspapers across the globe or see, nightly news footage, if you're in another country, you can say, whoa, I mean, I've heard about Mississippi. That's not only where they killed Emmett Till. I mean, they still lynching people in Mississippi. So these folks are fighting against that. Let me see what I can do in my own community. And so I really do think it's that underdog nature um, that people kind of glommed down to. Not that people in Mississippi saw themselves that way, right? They didn't see themselves that way, but the perception, the public perception, if you're in New York, if you're in Chicago, if you're in Berlin or London, then, oh, look at those poor people and how they are in this really valiant struggle. Black people in Mississippi knew what they were up against, you know, and then they didn't consider themselves an underdog, and they didn't consider themselves a minority, right? They knew that as part of Black people on this planet, they were part of the majority, you know, and they weren't too far from the majority in Mississippi at the time. But I mean, as far as the United States of America goes, yeah, Black people were, 12, 13% of the population. But as far as planet Earth goes, Black people are 3/5 of the Earth's population. So it's white folks that's in the minority, not them. And Black people in Mississippi understood that. So I think that understanding, that willingness to fight for life and limb and for their children, grandchildren, and great, 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 great grandchildren is an example that people could identify with, because at the end of the day, most people aren't the oppressor. Even if they're rich, even if they're white, they are not the oppressor. Most people are not. And they liked the example they saw, and it touched their hearts. And for some of them, it touched their souls. And so they began to put their bodies on the line, put their lives on the line. And that's how we get such a wide ranging global movement, because they like the example that Black people in Mississippi set.
You talked about the misinterpretation of the phrase Black Power. And I'm curious because you spoke a lot tonight about the pursuit of Black freedom. So, how would you define Black freedom, or what is the goal of Black freedom, particularly in America?
The goal of Black freedom is to be able to enjoy a life where you are free. And I want to put the period right there. Everybody watching this knows what it means to be free. Those who are free and those who are not free. I mean, that's as simple as I can put it. I can expound upon it and say free to go to school where you want, free to work where you want and be paid a living wage, free to not be harassed by the police, free to not be called a lot of vile names, free to live a life where you are not the butt of every societal joke, to live a life where the police can't choke you to death on TV and shoot you to death on TV. Like, you can have the video footage and they still go free. Yeah, I know the guy who killed George Floyd is in jail, but it's millions of Black people that have been killed. And you don't have no millions of white people in jail for that, or thousands, or hundreds, or dozens, right? So free from all that kind of business, free to live your life where you can raise your children, you can love your wife and your husband and your siblings, your cousins, your nieces, and your neighbors, the white ones and the Asian ones, the people who are indigenous people here. You can love and live and not be harassed for it. So again, that's what Black freedom is Black people don't want to be continually harassed and used as the doormat of the world. And that's what the case has been since 1619. The Black people in this country are the reason that capitalism was as successful as it was. They worked millions of Black people to death and became the richest nation in history. And they did that off of our backs and with our blood. And they're still doing that. And Black people want them to stop. They don't want to continue to be used like that. And they'd be smart to do something about it, just like Fannie Lou Hamer did something about it.
Mhm.
Just like May Bertha Carter did something about it and Medgar Evers did something about it. Black people would be smart to stand up for what they want. Otherwise, they're never going to get it.
I think that leads perfectly just into the last question for tonight is if there was one takeaway that the audience took from this conversation or just the most important thing for people to understand from your presentation and the discussion that we've had tonight, what would that be? What's the key takeaway for our audience tonight?
I would say the key takeaway, and people are going to be bringing different things to this, but I appreciate your question. In my mind, right? I think people should take away what they want, but in my mind, the key takeaway should be to do your own research, right? Don't listen to me. Don't listen to what other folks are telling you, especially the newspaper. Go to the library, get online, and do your own research and find out about your history, whether it's U.S. history, women's history, queer history, African American history, the history of the Black movement, the history of the freedom movement in general. Like, do your own research. And I guarantee you, if you did your own research, that you'll feel just like I do. And you'll be talking just like I'm talking, and you will do the same thing. You can't see me doing it, but I consider myself a scholar activist, and I don't just stand in front of my students and give lectures. Like, I go out in the community and I try to work with people to make their lives better and to make my own life better. Um, but I do that because I've done the research, right? And that's the takeaway: to go out and read as much as you can, watch as many movies, documentaries as you can, get that knowledge, use it and share it, and you know, plant the seed. If you don't want to do it, tell another person about it. Tell a child, tell an adult, tell somebody, but do the research.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you again. This has been an amazing presentation, a good conversation, and I know our audience will appreciate it. And there will be a lot of learning happening in our Flagstaff community and beyond from this. As we always say to our Live Black Experience community, we thank you for joining us tonight, for listening, for learning, and for going out to learn more beyond this conversation that we've had tonight. That is probably the most important thing that you can do to keep the conversation going, is to keep learning and keep participating and joining us for these sessions and having conversations on your own about not just the lived experience of the Black community in Flagstaff, but of peoples all around this country. And the stories that we're sharing are trying to help facilitate those conversations and keep that conversation alive. So thank you all for joining us tonight. And as we always close, go in grace.